There are objects in this world that function as mirrors. They are artifacts of such profound and silent strangeness that in gazing at them we see only the reflection of our own curiosity, our own desire for meaning. In the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscripts Library at Yale University, there is such an object. It is catalogued as MS 408. It is small, unassuming, and bound in a simple, unadorned vellum cover. It is also, quite possibly, the most baffling, unreadable, and mysterious book on the planet. For over a century it has resisted every attempt at comprehension, a perfect cipher of ink and vellum. It is, of course, the Voynich Manuscript. We are not here tonight to solve this object, but to understand it, to explore its known history, its physical reality, and the stubborn silence it has maintained. Join us as we respectfully uncover these hidden histories and soothe the curious mind.
Welcome to Secrets of the Ancients, where ancient mysteries awaken.
Our story begins not in the 15th century, where the book was born, but in the 20th, in a moment of discovery. The man who gives the manuscript its name was Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish revolutionary turned antiquarian book dealer, a man of intense charisma and a life steeped in politics and rare texts. In 1912, he was on a purchasing trip in Italy, exploring the archives of the Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college in Frascati, just outside of Rome. The college was at that time in need of funds, and it was quietly selling off some of its older, less essential holdings from its library, the Collegio Romano. Voynich, with his keen eye for the unique, was given access to a chest of these manuscripts. And it was there, among forgotten theological texts and classical histories, that he found it. We must pause and picture that moment. Voynich, a man who built his life on understanding the provenance and content of books, holds for the first time this small codex. It is roughly 9 inches by 6 inches, a very personal, portable size. The vellum, a high-quality prepared animal skin, is smooth but clearly aged. As he opens it, he does not find the familiar Latin, Greek, or Hebrew of a typical medieval text. Instead, he is confronted with page after page of a script that is, to all intents and purposes, alien. It is not a known alphabet. It is a flowing, elegant, and repetitive series of glyphs, or graphemes, that seem to have been written with confidence and purpose. There are no corrections, no signs of hesitation. The text flows around hundreds of drawings, but these illustrations only deepen the mystery. They are diagrams of planets that do not exist, charts of stars that do not correspond to any known constellation, and, most famously, images of small, naked women bathing in elaborate, interconnected, green pools. Wilfrid Voynich was captivated. He recognized immediately that this was either an object of singular, world-altering importance, perhaps a lost work by a figure like the 13th century polymath Roger Bacon, as he would later theorize, or it was a hoax hoax of breathtaking sophistication. He purchased the manuscript along with others, and from that moment it became his white whale, the great unsolved puzzle of his life. For decades, the manuscript was defined by Voynich's own search for answers. He shared facsimiles with cryptographers, linguists, and historians. But no one could make a single credible crack in its code. Upon his death, it passed to his wife, Ethel, and eventually to his associate, Anne Nill, who, in 1961, sold it to the rare book dealer Hans P. Krauss. Krauss, unable to find a buyer willing to meet his price, and equally unable to decipher the book, eventually donated it to Yale in 1969, where it has resided ever since, silently challenging the world's brightest minds. For much of the 20th century, the debate circled around one primary question: was it authentic? The hoax theory was powerful and logical. The most likely culprit in this scenario was Wilfred Voynich himself. He was a man who knew how to create discoveries, a showman in the world of rare books. It was entirely plausible that he had fabricated the codex, perhaps using old vellum, to create an unsolvable mystery, and thus an artifact of immense value. This theory of a modern 20th century forgery was the academic consensus for many years. This is where, as researchers, we must move from the romance of the story to the cold, hard data. The single most important breakthrough in Voynich studies has nothing to do with cryptography or linguistics. It has to do with atomic physics. In 2009, a team at the University of Arizona in Tucson was given permission to take minuscule samples from 4 different vellum pages of the manuscript. The goal was to subject them to accelerator mass spectrometry, our most precise method of radiocarbon dating. Let us briefly understand what this means. Radiocarbon, or carbon-14, is a naturally occurring radioactive isotope. While a living organism, in this case the calf or sheep that provided the skin, is alive, it absorbs carbon, maintaining a steady ratio of C14 to stable C12. The moment the organism dies, it stops absorbing, and the C14 begins to decay at a fixed, predictable rate, its half-life. By measuring the remaining ratio of C14, we can determine with a high degree of statistical confidence when that organism died. The results from the University of Arizona were definitive. They were conclusive, and they completely rewrote our understanding of the manuscript. The vellum, the physical pages of the book, dated from the early 15th century. The statistical model placed the creation of the parchment between the years 1404 and 1438, with a 95% confidence interval. What this tells us as a foundational fact is that the Voynich manuscript is not a 20th century hoax by Wilfred Voynich. It is not a 19th century forgery. It is undeniably a physical object from the late medieval period, the era of the early Renaissance. The book itself is authentic. This, of course, opens a second, equally important question. The vellum may be from the 1430s, but could the ink be from a later date? Could a clever forger perhaps in the 17th or 18th century, have found a blank 300-year-old book and filled it with nonsense. This brings us to the second pillar of the material analysis. In 2009, the Macron Research Institute in Chicago, a world leader in chemical microscopy, was permitted to analyze the inks and pigments on the manuscript. Their findings were, again, profoundly illuminating. The text is written primarily with a standard, period-appropriate iron gall ink. This was the dominant ink of the medieval world, made by fermenting oak galls, growths on oak trees, with iron sulfate. The coloured paints used for the illustrations are also consistent with the 15th century palette. They are not modern synthetic pigments. They are mineral-based ochres, yellows and reds, a green pigment made from copper, likely verdigris, and a blue derived from ground azurite. There was, however, one fascinating anomaly. The Macron analysis found that the blue pigment, azurite, was of a very high grade, finely ground quality. This was not a cheap material. Furthermore, the analysis suggested that the ink and the pigments were applied in a quill-by-quill fashion, meaning the author likely wrote a section of text, then illustrated it, then wrote more, all in one continuous process. The chemical composition of the ink on a given page is uniform, suggesting it was all mixed in one batch. When we synthesize these two streams of hard scientific data, a new picture emerges, and the mystery becomes even deeper. We now know with a very high degree of certainty that the Voynich Manuscript is a codex unicus, a single, unified object created in one process by one author or a small, collaborative scriptorium in the first half of the 15th century. The creator was not Wilfrid Voynich. The creator was someone living in Central Europe in the 1420s or 1430s. This was not a casual side project. The vellum was of high quality, requiring the preparation of at least a dozen full animal skins. The pigments, particularly the blue, were expensive. The creation of the text and the nearly 250 pages of illustrations was a time-consuming, deliberate, and costly act. This is the baseline from which all modern Voynich research must proceed. The object is real. The investment was significant. The intent, whatever it was serious. And yet, the content remains a perfect, impenetrable void. This is the central paradox of MS 408. We have an object that is physically, chemically, and historically grounded, but linguistically and iconographically, it is completely unmoored. It floats, free of any known context. The plants are not real plants. The stars are not real stars. The language is not a real language. The scientific analysis has, in essence, only sharpened the edges of the mystery. It has eliminated the easiest and most cynical theory, that of a modern forgery. It has forced us to confront a much more difficult possibility, that in the early 15th century, someone, for a purpose we cannot even guess, dedicated enormous time, resources, and intellectual energy to creating a 250-page book of beautiful, elegant, and utter nonsense. Or is it nonsense? Is it possible that it is not a hoax, but simply a text for which we have lost the key? Is it a lost language, a complex cipher, or a code so sophisticated that it has, for 600 years, refused to speak? This is the true starting point of our inquiry. We are no longer asking if the object is real. We are asking what it is. We must now leave the relative comfort of the chemistry lab and the carbon dating accelerator and step into the far more ambiguous and far more frustrating world of cryptography and linguistics. We must turn our attention away from the vellum and look closely at the script itself. The physical reality of the Voynich Manuscript, as we have established, is a settled matter. It is a genuine artifact of the early 15th century. This fact, so grounding, only makes the content more elusive. We must now turn our full attention to the text itself, the elegant, flowing script that has been the focus of a solid century of cryptographic obsession. This script is known colloquially as Voynichese. To the untrained eye, it might appear to be random scribbling, a form of glossolalia or speaking in tongues. But a closer, more methodical analysis reveals something else entirely. When we, as researchers, examine the text, we are immediately struck by its confidence. It is written from left to right in a single fluid hand. There are no obvious pauses, no corrections, no blots or erased words. The author, whoever they were, wrote this text as fluently as we would write our own native language. The alphabet itself is a unique creation. It is a small defined set of graphemes or glyphs. Scholars debate the exact number, but the consensus is an alphabet of somewhere between 20 and 30 core characters. Some of these glyphs are simple, resembling Latin or Greek letters. Others are far more elaborate, like the recurring gallows characters, which look like small gibbets and appear to anchor certain words. Crucially, these glyphs are not random. They are organized into words, clearly separated by spaces. The text has a discernible syntax. We can observe that certain glyphs appear almost exclusively at the beginnings of words, while others appear only at the end. This is a classic morphological feature of natural language. In English, for example, ing or ed are suffixes appearing at the end of words. They are not prefixes. Voynichese displays these same kinds of structural rules. This visual structural evidence is what first intrigued the great cryptographers of the 20th century. This was the challenge that humbled the most brilliant codebreakers of the modern era. Perhaps the most notable of these was William F. Friedman. Friedman is a legend in the history of cryptography. He was the chief cryptographer for the US Army's Signal Intelligence Service. His team broke Japan's purple cipher in World War II, a feat that had a direct and profound impact on the outcome of the war. He was, in short, a man who understood codes at a level few have ever achieved. Friedman dedicated years of his life, from the 1920s until his death, to the Voynich Manuscript. He and his team applied every known cryptographic technique. First, the simple substitution cipher. This is the most basic form of code, where each glyph simply stands for another letter. For example, every gallo glyph equals E. This was ruled out almost immediately. The frequency distribution of Voynich glyphs does not match the letter frequency of any known language. Furthermore, in no language do we see words that are simple repetitions, like e, or the. Yet in Voynich, we see word pairs and even triple repetitions quite often. Second, the polyalphabetic cipher. This is a more complex system, like the famous Vigenère cipher, where a single glyph can stand for multiple different letters, depending on a key. This too failed. These ciphers are designed to flatten the statistical properties of a language, to make every letter appear with roughly equal frequency. And this is where we encounter the central, profound, and beautiful paradox of the Voynich Manuscript. The text is not flattened. It is not random. In fact, it follows a statistical law that governs all known human languages. This principle is known as Zipf's law. It is an empirical observation named for the Harvard linguist George Kingsley Zipf. Zipf's law, in its simplest form, states that in any human language, the most frequently used word will appear approximately twice as often as the second most frequent word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. If we plot this on a graph for any large body of text, whether it's Moby Dick, War and Peace, or a transcript of tonight's news, it produces a distinct, predictable, logarithmic curve. It is a fingerprint of information being communicated in a human linguistic system. Random, meaningless gibberish, if you were to type it on a keyboard, does not follow Zipf's law. The distribution would be erratic or too flat. When statistical analysts first applied Zipf's law to the 170,000 characters of the Voynich Manuscript, they found something astonishing. It follows the law almost perfectly. Let this sink in. Whatever the Voynich Manuscript is, it is not random scribbling. It is not a 15th century doodle. The text is structured, organized, and behaves with the precise mathematical properties of a real, functional language. This finding electrifies the mystery. It tells us that the author, if they were a hoaxer, must have been a person of unfathomable genius. They would have had to intuitively or deliberately craft a 250-page text that adhered to complex linguistic laws that would not be formalized by scientists for another 500 years. This, in our academic opinion, seems far less probable than the alternative, that the text is a genuine information-bearing system. And the linguistic evidence does not stop with Zipf's law. Researchers have applied other statistical measures, such as word entropy. Entropy is a concept from information theory. It measures the randomness or unpredictability of a text. A text with very low entropy is rigid and repetitive, e.g., see Spot run, see Jane run. A text with high entropy is more complex and information-dense, e.g., a passage of James Joyce. Voynichese has an entropy that is lower than most European languages, like Latin or English. This points to its most notable and most frustrating feature. its repetitiveness. The text is full of repeated words and phrases. Certain words appear 2, 3, or even 4 times in a row. This is highly unusual. No natural language behaves this way. This very repetitiveness has led to 2 dueling conclusions. To the hoax theorists, this is proof. It is the sign of a forger who simply ran out of ideas, repeating the same words over and over to fill the pages. But to the cryptographers, this suggests a very specific kind of cipher. It could, for example, be a nomenclator. This is a hybrid code common in the 15th century that combines a simple substitution alphabet with a code book of symbols for common or important words. The word for plant, for example, might be a single unique glyph. If the text is a list of plants, this word would, naturally, be highly repetitive. This repetitiveness is also what led William Friedman to his final, unpublished conclusion. He came to believe that Voynich was not a cipher for a known language, but an a priori philosophical language. This is, in essence, an artificial invented language, a 15th century Esperanto. It was an attempt by some great polymath to categorize the world, to create a new system of logic where the words themselves were built from smaller component parts of meaning. This would explain the rigid structure, the repetitive word stems, and the complete lack of a known underlying language. In recent years, we have applied our most powerful tool to the manuscript: artificial intelligence. Researchers, including a team from the University of Alberta, have fed the entire text into sophisticated AI language models. The AI, just like the human analysts, came to the same conclusion. The text is not gibberish. The AI was able to confirm with statistical confidence that the text has an underlying structure. It was able to identify different dialects within the manuscript, now known as Voynich A and Voynich B, which seem to correlate with different sections of the book, suggesting either a change in subject matter or, perhaps, even 2 different authors working from the same rule book. The AI even suggested, based on statistical comparisons with hundreds of other languages, that the ground language might be a form of archaic Hebrew. But when researchers tried to apply this theory, to actually translate the words using this hypothesis, the result was, once again, nonsense. And this is the central, frustrating wall that every researcher hits. The Voynich manuscript appears to be a perfect lock. We can analyze its components. We can measure its tumblers. We can appreciate its fine craftsmanship. But we do not have the key. The statistics tell us emphatically this is language. But the language itself refuses to speak. It has no Rosetta Stone. It has no bilingual text, no fragment of Latin or German that might offer a single, solitary foothold. It is a system that is entirely, hermetically sealed. Every attempt, from the most brilliant World War II codebreakers to the most powerful 21st century artificial intelligences, has failed. It has yielded nothing but gibberish, disconnected fragments, or tantalizing, unprovable patterns. The script, in the end, is a dead end. It is a perfect 600-year-old riddle. We have analyzed the vellum. We have analyzed the ink. We have analyzed the script. we are left with only one remaining avenue of inquiry. One last source of data that might provide a context for this unreadable text. We must, with the same calm, methodical approach, turn our gaze to the illustrations. We must enter the manuscript's bizarre phantom garden. The text of the Voynich Manuscript, as we have seen, is a perfect sealed system. For a century, it has returned every cryptographic inquiry with a profound, mathematical, and unyielding silence. When the linguistic path becomes a cul-de-sac, the researcher must turn to the only other source of information available: the context. In most illuminated manuscripts, the text and the illustrations exist in a symbiotic relationship. The images elucidate the words caption the images. It was our hope, and the hope of researchers for decades, that the Voynich's illustrations might serve as our Rosetta Stone. If we could identify a plant, a star, or an object, we could perhaps, by reverse engineering, deduce the meaning of the Voynich word written beside it. And so, we must turn our gaze with calm and methodical patience to the images themselves. When we do, we find that the manuscript is not a single monolithic work, but is clearly divided into at least 6 distinct sections, defined by their illustrative content. These sections are known by modern scholarly convention as the herbal, the astronomical, the balneological, the cosmological, the pharmaceutical, and a final text-heavy section of recipes or stars. Let us begin with the largest, the one that gives the manuscript its most common identity: the herbal section. This comprises the first half of the book, nearly 130 folios, each one dedicated to a full-page illustration of a single plant. Accompanying each plant is a block of Voynichese text, formatted as we might expect in a practical herbal or pharmacopoeia. The problem, and it is a profound one, is that of the hundreds of plants illustrated, not a single one has ever been definitively identified. We must be very clear about what this means. This is not simply a matter of poor draftsmanship. We have thousands of contemporary 15th century herbals. We have copies of the Tacuinum Sanitatis or the Herbarium Apulae Platonici. The artists of these texts, while working in a medieval, pre-photographic style, were creating practical, scientific documents. Their goal was identification. A physician or an apothecary had to be able to look at the drawing, go into a field, and find the correct plant. The Voynich plants, by contrast, seem to actively defy identification. They are not of this world. They are often composites, chimeras. We see a drawing with the roots of one known species, the leaves of a second, and the flower of a third. They are phantom plants, creations of pure imagination, or perhaps of a symbolic system to which we are not privy. This is a foundational, critical piece of evidence. If the manuscript was intended as a practical guide to botany, it is a total, abject failure. This fact has opened 2 major lines of inquiry. The first and most cynical is that this is the ultimate proof of a hoax. The creator, a 15th century forger, knew they needed to fill an herbal, but lacked any actual botanical knowledge. So, They simply invented the plants, drawing fantastic creations from their mind, page after page. The second line of inquiry is more subtle. What if the plants are not physical, but symbolic? In the world of 15th century alchemy, plants and minerals were often given symbolic forms. A plant might not represent itself, but a stage in a chemical process or a philosophical concept. The composite nature of the plants could, in this light, be a form of alchemical recipe in itself. Combine the root of X with the flower of Y. This brings us to the second, and by far the most famous and baffling section of the manuscript. It is known as the balneological section, from the Latin balneum, or bath. It is here that any pretense of a known 15th century tradition vanishes. These pages are filled with intricate, complex diagrams of interconnected pipes, tubes and pools. And in these pools, bathing and standing, are dozens of small, naked female figures. They are often depicted in groups, sometimes holding hands, sometimes in isolation. The fluid they are submerged in is almost always painted a distinct, opaque green. When we, as objective researchers, analyze these drawings, we are struck by their clinical, non-sensual nature. These are not the erotic nymphs of a later Renaissance. They are small, almost diagrammatic figures. Many are drawn with the prominent, rounded abdomens that were a common medieval stylistic convention for representing the female form. What, in the context of the early 1400s, could this possibly mean? Again, we are faced with dueling theories. The most prominent and compelling, argued by scholars like Dr. Nicholas Gibbs, though his translation has been widely debunked, his contextual analysis remains interesting, is that this is a Liber Mulierum, a book of women. This could be a text dedicated to women's health, to gynecology, to midwifery. The bathing scenes might be a stylized, symbolic representation of herbal baths, hydrotherapy, or fertility treatments. The strange pipes could represent the internal organs of the body, or perhaps a complex spa system. This theory is appealing because it is human. It frames the manuscript not as an alien cipher, but as a practical, if deeply encoded, medical manual for the most personal aspects of human life. The alternate theory, of course, is alchemy. In this reading, the nymphs are not human women. They are representations of spirits, of essences, or of stages of a chemical transmutation. The green liquid could be an aqua regia or some other acidic solvent. The pipes are not baths, but a fantastical depiction of the alchemist's apparatus. The alembics, retorts and condensers of a 15th century laboratory. The key takeaway from the balneological section is its utter uniqueness. We have no other visual tradition from this period anywhere in the world that looks anything like this. The author was, in their illustrations, a true original. The other sections of the manuscript, while smaller, only compound this sense of contextual isolation. There is the astronomical section. This consists of circular diagrams, or volvales, clearly related to the heavens. We can identify with some confidence familiar signs of the zodiac. We see a recognizably rendered Pisces, the fish, a Sagittarius, the archer, a Taurus, the bull. But these familiar signs are embedded in a system that is wholly unfamiliar. They are surrounded by rings of Voynich's text, and in some cases, by rings of the same tiny nymphs from the bathing section, each one holding a star. This is not a standard Ptolemaic map of the heavens. It is a highly personalized, deeply strange astrological or cosmological system. This leads to the cosmological section, a series of the most abstract and beautiful drawings in the book. These are large, complex, fold-out pages known as rosettes. They depict mandala-like diagrams, intricate networks of circles, castles, and pathways. We have no clear idea what these are. They could be maps, but not of any earthly geography. They could be representations of the microcosm and macrocosm, a philosophical map of the soul, or of the elements. They are, in a word, impenetrable. Finally, we have the pharmaceutical section. This is, in many ways, a return to the practical. These pages show grids of objects, leaves, roots, seed pods, arrayed next to what are clearly apothecary jars. This section strongly reinforces the medical or herbal hypothesis. This is a list of ingredients. This is a pharmacopoeia. Following this is the final, unillustrated section, often called the recipes or stars. It is simply dense, unbroken Voynichese, with small, star-like markers in the margin of each new paragraph. This is, many believe, the key to the book, the actual recipes, the instructions, the spells, or the divinations for which the preceding 5 sections serve as a catalogue and a guide. So, what have we learned from the illustrations? They have, unfortunately, failed to be our Rosetta Stone.
Just like the text, the images are internally consistent. They follow their own rules, with recurring motifs and a single, confident artistic hand, but they are externally isolated. They do not connect to any known 15th century visual tradition. The phantom plants and the bizarre bathing scenes have, in fact, only deepened the mystery. They have strongly suggested that the manuscript is not a literal, straightforward text.
It is either a document of profound symbolism related to alchemy or a lost medical tradition, or it is a hoax of unparalleled visual imagination and intellectual effort. We are left with a text that follows the laws of a language we cannot read, and images that follow the laws of a world we cannot identify. The what has eluded us. We are forced, then, to pivot our inquiry one last time. If we cannot understand what the book is, perhaps we can understand who made it. We must leave the ambiguous world of interpretation and return to the hard, tangible world of evidence. We must ask, where did this book come from? We must trace with forensic precision the documented history of its ownership. We must follow its paper trail. When we, as researchers, are faced with an artifact that is both textually and visually impenetrable, we must pivot our investigation. If the what remains a mystery, we must pursue the who and the when. We must, in essence, become forensic archivists. We must trace the object's provenance, its chain of ownership, backward through time, searching for a single verifiable link. The Voynich Manuscript, as it turns out, provided that link itself. When Wilfred Voynich opened the small vellum codex at the Villa Mondragone in 1912, he found, tucked inside its pages, a piece of folded parchment. It was a letter. This single document, dated 1665 or possibly 1666, is the most important primary source we have, apart from the manuscript itself. It is our only solid anchor connecting the 20th century to the 17th. This document is known as the Marci letter. It was written by a man named Johannes Marcus Marci, a prominent Bohemian physician, scientist, and philosopher from Prague. He was a man of considerable standing, the official physician to the Holy Roman Emperor. The letter was addressed to, in his words, the most learned and reverend Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit priest in Rome. Kircher, we must understand, was a figure of immense intellectual celebrity. He was, perhaps, the last true polymath, a man who believed he could know everything. He was the 17th century's master of 100 arts, the founder of a great museum, and, most importantly for our story, he was a cryptographer. He had claimed, famously, to have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, a claim we now know was incorrect, but which cemented his reputation at the time. If anyone in the world could decipher an unreadable book, the consensus was that it would be Athanasius Kircher. So, in 1665, Marci, in Prague, writes to Kircher, in Rome. His letter is a plea for help. He explains that he is sending Kircher a hitherto undeciphered manuscript that had been left to him by a most intimate friend. This friend, he states, was a man named Georg Baresch. This gives us our first verifiable owner, Georg Baresch. Baresch, as we know from other sources, was a humble alchemist, also living in Prague. According to Marci, Baresch had occupied himself with this sphinx, giving his life to the problem, but had been unable to solve it. Baresch, it seems, had been the one to first identify Kircher as a potential decipherer, but was too modest to contact the great scholar himself. Upon Baresch's death, the manuscript passed to his friend Marci, who was now fulfilling Baresch's wish. When we analyze this letter, we see the first documented instance of the Voynich obsession. Baresch, Marci writes, could not part with the book so long as he lived. It had already become a white whale to its owner. But the letter contains two more crucial and far more tantalizing pieces of information. These are the details that have fueled the legends of the manuscript for centuries. First, Marci tells Kircher that the book was once purchased by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II for the sum of 600 gold ducats. This was an astronomical price, equating to tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars today. Second, Marci relays a rumour that the author of the manuscript was the 13th century English friar and polymath, Roger Bacon. Let us, as methodical researchers, separate these claims. The Roger Bacon theory, the Bacon hypothesis, was the one Wilfred Voynich himself championed. It made perfect sense. Bacon was a 13th century Doctor Mirabilis,
a man who wrote on ciphers, optics, and alchemy. He was a man persecuted by the church for his radical scientific ideas.
What could be more logical than him hiding his greatest secrets in an unbreakable code? For nearly a century, this was the dominant theory. But this is where, as we discussed, modern science intervenes. The radiocarbon dating of the vellum, performed in 2009, places the creation of the manuscript between 1404 and 1438. Roger Bacon died in 1294. The C14 data, therefore, conclusively disproves the Bacon hypothesis. The rumour that Marcy relayed to Kircher in 1665 was already at that time incorrect. The book was not a product of the 13th century. It was a product of the early 15th. This leaves us with the second claim, the Emperor Rudolf II. This is far more plausible. Rudolf's court in Prague at the turn of the 17th century was the world's epicenter of the occult. It was a gathering place for alchemists, astrologers, Kabbalists, and philosophers. Rudolf was a reclusive, brilliant, and deeply melancholy ruler, obsessed with collecting objects of wonder, automata, strange artworks, and, most especially, hermetic and alchemical texts. This environment, this specific moment in history, is the perfect setting for the Voynich Manuscript. It is a world where a book of phantom plants and alchemical baths would not be seen as a hoax, but as a profound document of secret wisdom. The 600 ducat price tag, which Marcy mentions, also points to Rudolf. It was a prince's price, and Rudolf was a prince who famously paid such sums. But we must be cautious. Marcy's letter presents this as a claim, a story told to Barish by the unnamed person he got the book from. We have as yet no primary source, no receipt from the imperial treasury, no inventory list from Rudolf's Kunstkammer, his cabinet of curiosities, that lists MS 408. It remains a very strong, very probable, but unproven piece of the puzzle. This leads us to the most famous legend of all, one not even mentioned by Marcy: the connection to John Dee. John Dee was, in many ways, the English equivalent of Athanasius Kircher. He was Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer and occult philosopher, a brilliant mathematician, and a man who believed he was in communication with angels via a system of Enochian magic. In the 1580s, Dee, along with his deeply suspect alchemical partner, Edward Kelly, travelled across Europe and spent several years at the court of Rudolf II in Prague. The legend is perfect. Dee, the great English mystic, sells the mysterious, unreadable book, perhaps claiming it is the lost work of Roger Bacon, his spiritual predecessor, to the occult-obsessed Emperor Rudolf for a vast sum of money. This would explain the 600 ducats, the Rudolf connection, and the Bacon myth. It is a wonderful, compelling story. And it is entirely 100% speculation. When we search the primary sources, we find nothing. John Dee kept meticulous, obsessive diaries. We can read them today. He lists his meetings with the emperor. He lists his financial transactions. He details his alchemical experiments and his angelic conversations. Nowhere in these extensive, detailed records is there any mention of a mysterious, encoded herbal. There is no mention of a 600 ducat sale. The truth is, we simply do not know how Rudolf, if he owned it, or Baresh, who did own it, came to possess the book. The trail, which was so clear from 1665, goes cold in the early 1600s. We have the object, we have its C14 date of Sir 1420, and then we have a 200-year silence. We call this 200-year gap the Great Silence. The book was created by an unknown hand in an unknown location in Central Europe, around 1420. And then it vanishes from the historical record. It appears 2 centuries later in the hands of an obscure alchemist in Prague. Let us now return to the hard evidence and follow the trail forward from 1665. Marcy seals his letter, bundles it with the manuscript, and sends it on the long, difficult journey from Prague to Rome, to the desk of Athanasius Kircher. Kircher receives it, and this, it seems, is where the story should have its great breakthrough. The Sphinx of Baresh meets the Oedipus of Rome. And what happens? Nothing. It appears that Athanasius Kircher, the man who claimed to have solved hieroglyphics, was utterly defeated by the Voynich Manuscript. We have no record of him ever writing about it. He left no notes, no attempted translations, no solution. It seems he simply and quietly placed the book on a shelf. Upon Kircher's death, his vast collection, including the manuscript, was absorbed into the general library of the Jesuit Collegio Romano. And there its story ends again. For another 200 years the book sits unread, uncatalogued in any meaningful way, its urgent mystery forgotten. It is just another old, strange book in one of the world's largest private libraries. The trail stays cold until the 1870s, when the forces of Italian unification put pressure on the Papal States. The Jesuit order, fearing its library would be confiscated by the new Italian government, began to quietly disperse its holdings. The library of the Collegio Romano was moved, in part, to the Villa Mondragone in Frascati for safekeeping. And it was there, in 1912, as we know, that the college, in need of money, opened its archives to a charismatic Polish book dealer. Wilfred Voynich purchased the codex and found, still tucked inside, the 247-year-old letter from Johannes Marcus Marci. This is the sum of our factual knowledge. The provenance is a dumbbell shape. We have a solid C14 dated origin in the early 15th century. We have a solid document provenanced history from 1665 onward. And in between, we have a 200-year void, filled only by the tantalizing unproven legends of Prague. We have now examined the vellum, the script, the art, and the history. We have exhausted the what, the how, and the who. We are left with only one task. We must confront the why. We must, with all the evidence we have gathered, calmly and skeptically analyze the grand hypotheses We have now, with methodical patience, examined every facet of the object known as MS-408. We have touched its vellum and dated its creation to the early 15th century. We have analysed its ink, confirming its medieval origin. We have followed its paper trail from a Jesuit college in 1912, back to an alchemist's desk in 17th century Prague. We have scrutinized its bizarre, unique illustrations, a garden of phantoms and a spa of nymphs. And we have, with all our modern cryptographic and statistical power, stood before its elegant, flowing text, a text that obeys all the laws of language, but refuses to speak a single word. We have exhausted the what, the who, and the where. We are left, finally, with the most difficult and most important question. Why? We must now, in this final stage of our inquiry, enter the realm of structured hypothesis. We will take the most prominent theories that have been proposed over the last century, and we will weigh them, with academic skepticism, against the portfolio of facts we have gathered. The first, and in many ways the simplest of these theories, is the sophisticated hoax. This is, in many ways, the default position for an object of such profound strangeness. It is Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is often the correct one. The argument is straightforward. The plants are fake because the author couldn't draw real ones. The stars are wrong because the author had no astronomical knowledge, and the text is meaningless, a stream of glossolalia or automatic writing designed to look like a real language but with no underlying content. The repetitiveness of the script in this light is not a feature of a complex cipher. It is the sign of a forger getting lazy or running out of ideas and simply copying the same words over and over to fill the 250 pages. For most of the 20th century, this was a perfectly viable, even probable explanation. The blame was often laid at the feet of Wilfred Voynich himself, a man with the motive, means, and showmanship to create such a forgery. But, as we have seen, the 2009 radiocarbon dating has rendered that specific theory impossible. The vellum is from the early 1400s. The ink is from the 1400s. This is not a modern hoax. This forces the hoax theory to evolve. It is not a modern hoax, it is a medieval one. Let us explore this idea. Someone, circa 1420, dedicated a vast amount of time and, more importantly, a vast amount of money to this project. We must remember, the vellum alone would have required a large flock of animals. The high-grade azurite pigment was expensive. This was a costly, time-consuming endeavor. What, then, was the motive? Who was the intended mark? The most common target proposed is Emperor Rudolf II, who, as Marzi's letter states, paid 600 ducats for it. Perhaps the book was created specifically to be discovered by an agent of the occult-obsessed emperor. But the timeline simply does not work. The book was created circa 1420. Rudolph's court was circa 1600. This would mean the forger created this masterpiece of deception, and it then sat, unused and unsold, in a chest for nearly 200 years before finding its perfect buyer. This stretches credulity No, a 15th century hoax would have to be intended for a 15th century audience. And this is where the theory begins to break down. But the most powerful, and to my mind the near definitive argument against the hoax theory, is the text itself. It is the very thing that seems the most fake. As we discussed, the manuscript's text follows with almost perfect fidelity Zipf's law. Let us pause to truly absorb the implications of this. To accept the 15th century hoax theory, we must believe that the forger, this anonymous genius, sat down and intuitively invented a 170,000 character stream of gibberish that, by pure chance, ended up obeying complex statistical laws of linguistics that would not be discovered, let alone formalized, for another 500 years. This seems improbable. It would require a forger of such colossal, innate, and unrepeatable genius that the hoax itself would be a more profound artifact than an authentic text. When we weigh the probabilities, the idea of a 15th century forger anticipating 20th century information theory seems, to me, far more fantastical than any other solution. The statistical evidence, therefore, compels us to set aside the hoax hypothesis and to proceed with a much more electrifying assumption. The text is not gibberish. It is a genuine, information-bearing system. This leads us to our second grand hypothesis, the lost or natural language. This theory posits that the text is not a cipher at all. It is simply a known human language that has been transcribed into an invented ad hoc alphabet. The author, perhaps for secrecy or simply for aesthetic reasons, created a unique script to write down their own native tongue. The appeal of this theory is its simplicity. It explains Zipf's law. Of course the text follows it because it is a natural language. It also explains the fluid and confident nature of the writing. For decades, researchers have been on a quest to find the ground language. Could it be a lost dialect of medieval German? A form of Czech? A Romance language? In recent years, artificial intelligence has been applied to this problem. The University of Alberta team, in 2018, famously fed the entire manuscript to an AI trained on hundreds of languages. The AI's statistical analysis concluded that the ground language was most likely a form of ancestral or anomalous Hebrew. It even proposed a translation, claiming the first sentence read, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house and me and people." This was, for a moment, a stunning breakthrough. But when Hebrew scholars and other linguists examined the translation, it fell apart. The AI, it seemed, had been tricked by the statistical properties of the text. The translation was vague, grammatically questionable, and ultimately just as nonsensical as any other attempt. Other researchers using similar methods have proposed Old Turkish or even a form of medieval Aztec, Nahuatl, a theory that is completely disproven by the C14 date. The great problem with the natural language hypothesis is that if it were true, Our most powerful computers should have been able to solve it. A simple substitution cipher is trivial for a modern computer. The fact that no one, using any language as a key, has been able to produce a single, verifiable, coherent paragraph of text is a powerful argument against it. Furthermore, the structure of Voynichese is strange. The extreme repetitiveness, the way certain words appear 2 or 3 times in a row, the rigid syntax. These are not features of any known natural language. This suggests that if it is a natural language, it has been processed or encoded in some way. This leads us, logically, to our third and perhaps most dominant theory: the unbreakable cipher. This theory argues that the text is indeed a known language, likely Latin, medieval German or Italian, given its 15th century European origin, but that it has been hidden not by a simple alphabet, but by a true cryptographic system. The repetitiveness of the text in this light is not a sign of a lazy forger. It is a clue. It strongly suggests a nomenclator cipher. As we've touched on, this is a hybrid system, common in the 15th century. It combines a simple substitution alphabet, A equals star, B equals equal, etc., with a codebook of symbols for common or important words. If the Voynich Manuscript is unreadable, it is logical that there would be a special glyph for plant, for root, for water, for leaf. These words would naturally appear over and over, creating the repetitive statistical profile we see. This is a clean, elegant, and historically plausible theory. It fits the time period. It fits the statistical evidence. But it has one enormous, unassailable problem. It, too, has failed. For 100 years, the world's greatest codebreakers have attacked the manuscript with this very assumption. William Friedman, the man who broke Japan's purple cipher, could not make it yield. Every attempt, every permutation has produced nothing. This has led to more complex cipher theories. Perhaps it is a polyalphabetic cipher, where one glyph can mean A in one place and T in another. Or perhaps, as some have theorized, the real code is not in the letters at all. Perhaps it is a form of micrography, where the true message is hidden in tiny, microscopic strokes within the main letters. Or perhaps it is a cardan grill, where the text is meaningless until you lay a special card with holes cut in it over the page, revealing the true message. These theories become, in their own way, as fantastical as the hoax theory. They require us to believe in a 15th century cipher maker who was so advanced, so brilliant, that he created a system that remains 600 years later impervious to both human genius and artificial intelligence. This is the great paradox of the cipher hypothesis. Ciphers are, by their very nature, tools of communication. They are designed to be unlocked by a recipient who holds the key. A cipher that is permanently, perfectly, and universally unbreakable is not a cipher. It is a failed act of communication. It is, in effect, just noise. This is where William Friedman, the great codebreaker, landed in his final, unpublished work. He concluded that it was likely an a priori philosophical language. It was an invention, a 15th century Esperanto, an attempt by some great mind to categorize the entire world into a new, logical system of language. This would explain everything. It would follow Zipf's law because it was designed as a language. It would be repetitive because it was built on logical, recurring stems. And it would be untranslatable because it is not for a known language, it is its own language. This is, to this day, one of the most intellectually satisfying and profoundly unprovable theories. We are left then with a text we cannot access. And so, we must circle back to our final set of hypotheses, the ones that try to bridge the gap between the silent text and the bizarre illustrations. These are the thematic purpose theories. Let us assume the text is a cipher. What is it about? The most popular and humanizing theory is that the manuscript is a women's health manual. This theory, championed in various forms over the years, looks at the balneological section, the bathing women, and sees not a fantasy, but a practical, if symbolic, guide. In this reading, the nymphs are real women. The pipes and pools are a diagrammatic representation of hydrotherapy, of herbal baths, or perhaps even of the internal gynecological systems of the female body. The phantom plants in the herbal section are, in fact, real plants, but drawn symbolically to represent their use in treating women's ailments, from fertility to pregnancy to menstruation. The motive for encoding such a text would have been powerful. This was women's knowledge, often held by midwives and herbalists. In the early 15th century, this was a dangerous knowledge to possess. The Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, was just a few decades away. To write such a book in plain language could have been a death sentence, an invitation for accusations of witchcraft. Encoding it was an act of profound self-preservation, a way to share vital medical knowledge only with those who held the key. This theory is appealing. It is humane. It grounds the manuscript in a real and often persecuted human experience. But it, too, has flaws. If the plants are practical remedies, why are none of them identifiable? Even a symbolic drawing would need to have some link to the real-world ingredient. And this theory struggles to explain the vast, complex astronomical and cosmological sections. Why would a midwife's manual need such intricate, abstract maps of the heavens? This leads to the final and most romantic of the theories: the alchemical text. This hypothesis argues that the manuscript is a coded guide to the magnum opus, the great work of alchemy, the creation of the philosopher's stone. In this reading, the text is a cipher for alchemical recipes and philosophical principles. The illustrations are not literal, they are allegorical. The phantom plants are not botanicals, they are alchemical symbols. The nymphs in their green baths are not women, they are essences, spirits, or representations of metals dissolving in an acidic aqua regia. The astronomical charts are not for navigation. They are for determining the auspicious times for certain chemical operations. This theory has the benefit of explaining everything. It accounts for the secrecy. Alchemy was a secret art by definition. It accounts for the bizarre imagery. Alchemical texts are famous for their strange, symbolic drawings. And it fits the known provenance. Its first documented owner, Georg Baresch, was an alchemist. The court of Rudolf II, where it may have resided, was the world capital of alchemy. But, like every other theory, it runs into a wall. When we compare the Voynich Manuscript to other known 15th century alchemical texts, it shares no common visual language. Alchemical illustration has its own well-established symbolic alphabet: the green lion, the red king, the white queen, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail. The Voynich Manuscript contains none of these. It is, once again, a complete and total outlier. It does not look like any other alchemical text we have. And so, here we are. We are left at the end of our inquiry with a perfect, unresolved tension. The hoax theory requires a 15th century genius who could predict 20th century statistics. The language theory requires a language that behaves like no other known language. The cipher theory requires a cryptographer 600 years ahead of his time who created a message for no recipient. And the purpose-driven theories require us to accept a visual language that has no precedent and no descendants. Every avenue of inquiry, when followed to its logical conclusion, ends in a paradox. Every hypothesis, when tested, reveals more questions than it answers. We find ourselves at the end of this long and methodical journey, in a state of perfect, unresolved equilibrium. We have followed every thread of evidence. We have applied the cold precision of radiocarbon dating and the analytical power of chemical microscopy. We have traced the object's physical journey through time, from a 17th century alchemist's desk to a 21st century library vault. We have listened with all our modern statistical tools for a whisper of meaning from its text. And in return, the manuscript has offered us nothing but its own beautiful, silent, and stubborn existence. Every grand hypothesis, as we have seen, collapses under the weight of a single, contradictory fact. It is a hoax that follows laws of linguistics its forger could not have known. It is a language that behaves like no other. It is a cipher created at great expense for no known recipient. It is an herbal of plants that do not grow, an astronomical chart of stars that do not shine, a medical text with no precedent. When an inquiry reaches such a total and complete impasse, the methodical researcher is forced to ask a new question. What if the problem is not with the object? What if the problem is with our expectation? We have, for a century, approached the Voynich Manuscript as a puzzle to be solved. We have treated it as a locked box, assuming that if we could only find the right key, the contents, the meaning would be revealed.
What if the problem
But
is
what
with
if
our
this is the wrong
expectation?
metaphor? What if, as we suggested at the very beginning, the manuscript is not a locked box, but a mirror? When we, as a culture, look at MS 408, we do not see its meaning. we see a perfect, unblemished reflection of our own. Consider this. To the 17th century alchemist George Barash, it was a sphinx, a container of lost hermetic wisdom. To the 17th century polymath Athanasius Kircher, it was a challenge to his reputation as the world's great decipherer. To the 20th century book dealer Wilfred Voynich, it was the ultimate discovery, a potential link to the legendary Roger Bacon. And to us, in the 21st century, the manuscript has become the perfect Rorschach test for our own disciplines. When the cryptographer looks at the manuscript, they see the ultimate cipher, the Everest of their field. When the linguist looks, they see a perfect, untouched specimen of pure linguistic structure, a language free of all cultural baggage. When the historian of science looks, they see a lost alchemical or medical text, a window into a persecuted secret knowledge. The art historian sees a unique example of outsider art, completely free from the traditions and conventions of its time. And the conspiracy theorist, of course, sees a reflection of their own chosen narrative, be it aliens, Atlantis, or a global plot. The Voynich Manuscript is so powerful because it is so empty. It is a void of such perfect, intelligent form that it can hold infinitely whatever meaning we choose to pour into it. What this tells us as researchers into the human experience is something profound. The manuscript's true value may not be in its hidden content at all. Its value is in its unsolvability. It functions in our modern data-driven world as a kind of control object. It is the ultimate test for our analytical hubris. We can aim our most powerful artificial intelligences at it, and they are humbled. We can apply our most sophisticated statistical models, and they return only paradoxes. The manuscript is a 600-year-old reminder of the limits of our knowledge. It is a testament to the fact that for all our progress, there are still objects and minds that we simply cannot penetrate. There is also a strange, quiet comfort in its mystery. As long as the manuscript is unsolved, it remains an object of pure potential. It is, in a sense, all theories at once. It could be the lost medical knowledge of a 15th century midwife. It could be the great philosophical work of an unknown genius. It could be an alchemist's secret diary. It could be a 250-page act of artistic devotion. The moment it is solved, all of that potential energy collapses into a single, mundane reality. If a key is found and it turns out to be a simple herbal or a student's coded notebook, the mystery that has fueled 1,000 inquiries will be, in an instant, gone. The mirror will shatter, and we will be left with just a book. Perhaps then the manuscript's purpose is not to be read, but to be contemplated. It is the final, unanswerable question. It is an object that forces us to confront our own innate and deeply human desire for meaning. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We cannot, as a species, abide a void. When we are faced with 250 pages of elegant, intelligent form that is devoid of content, our minds rush in to fill that void. We project our hopes, our fears, our biases, and our disciplines onto its silent vellum pages. The ultimate riddle of the Voynich Manuscript, then, may not be what is written in its pages. The riddle is us. Why are we so compelled by it? The manuscript is the story of a single, unknown human mind from the early 15th century. It is the product of an obsessive, expensive, and deeply personal labour. We may never know the name of this person, or the precise nature of their obsession. But what they created, whether by design or by accident, is the most perfect reflection of human curiosity that the medieval world has left behind. It is a 600-year-old enigma that has, in the end, revealed far more about its investigators than it has about itself. It is, and may forever remain, a perfect, quiet, and beautiful unknown. We have come to the end of our inquiry. The true story of this manuscript is not one of a solution, but of a persistent human question. The calm it offers is not in a final answer, but in the simple, profound act of wonder, of looking into a void and seeing the reflection of our own curious mind.